Welcome to Star Narratives, the podcast, where we have thought-provoking conversations with fascinating people, weaving in the astrological elements of their natal chart. We go so much deeper than just astrology for astrology's sake. Hi, I'm your host, Natha Campanella, and I teach people how to use the wisdom of astrology as an emotional health toolkit. Hi, thanks for joining me. It's Natha. Today I have such an interesting guest, and as I'm sure you'll hear me say about 10 times, I just really was quite captivated with every story that they told, with every bit of wisdom and personal perspective that they shared. And I'm talking about Claire Rudy Foster, who goes by Foster. And I'm just going to read their bio. It's on their website. So Foster is a queer, non-binary trans writer who lives in Portland, Oregon. Foster writes fiction, nonfiction, personal essays, articles, reported news stories, interviews, book reviews, cultural commentary, etc. Foster is the author of a short story collection called Shine of the Ever. It's getting released in November of 2019, and they were kind enough to send me a copy, and I've just really devoured it. And in the interview, they tell us what they were writing about and their process. Highly suggest that you guys find this book in any number of places and find it on pre-sale and add it to your book list. Buy it, wait for it to just be magically downloaded or delivered when it gets released in November. So astrologically, we're talking about Pallas Athena today. We also, of course, touch on Scorpio because, well, it's not a Star Narratives with Natha unless we touch on Scorpio and Pluto, right? But primarily we're talking about Pallas Athena. And I'm just going to read a little bit, and this is from the book Asteroid Goddesses by Demetra George. And she explains that, this is an asteroid that is connected with gender fluidity, because in mythology, Pallas Athena sprung from her father Zeus's head, a fully grown warrior queen, shouting a triumphant cry of victory. And she goes on to say that from a sociological perspective, that this marks the ingestion and adaptation of the feminine wisdom principle to the needs of the new patriarchal order. So there's really this thing that shows up with Pallas Athena. And when I'm reading her in a chart for somebody, usually what I say to describe what this asteroid is doing in our charts is that she is the feminine warrior principle. Mars is the masculine warrior principle. And I think that it's safe to say, especially in a conversation where we're talking about non-binary quite a bit, that, I think that we all hold both the masculine and the feminine in varying degrees within us. And there's something about Pallas Athena that is very androgynous in nature. And Foster actually kind of cracked me up in the interview as he was kind of describing that Pallas Athena is this warrior that is so badass, and she's also totally petty and vindictive. And I kind of thought that was funny, because we do kind of put these, I don't know, I think sometimes, and maybe this is me as an astrologer, is we put these asteroid goddesses up on a pedestal. And I think we put people up on pedestals, and we all come crashing down at some point or another because we all have our shortcomings. But we talk, I was really excited to find the Pallas Athena connection in Foster's chart, because I think that it really tells a beautiful story about the mission of their soul and what they're here doing on this planet at this time. And certainly after reading the book, The Shine of the Ever, I really I really feel like Foster is here to do some work. Maybe it be very activism work, and we're all doing activism work in one way or the other. Sometimes it's very, very subtle and very personal, and sometimes it's a little bit more seen and out in the open. But either way, it does seem like Foster is here to kind of present people in just sort of a light that maybe we wouldn't have been able to see otherwise. So I hope that you enjoy this interview as much as I did. And I think we can just jump in. Hello, Foster.
Hello, how are you?
I am good. We had a little bit of fun conversation before we started recording, and I just felt like, oh, I've gotta get you saying this stuff
Oh,
on film. So I guess before we really jump in, we're going to talk obviously about some Pallas Athena stuff today, and
yes,
is an asteroid. But before we really jump in, is there any way that you would like to introduce yourself to anybody that's listening?
sure. My name is Foster, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I write under my full name, which is Claire Rudy Foster, and I am a non binary trans queer author who deals mostly with, like important things like astrology and relationships and sex and gender and, you know, just the little stuff, the light things.
All of that fun stuff. But in my
Yeah.
opinion, that's really, really interesting stuff. And I think you and I have a lot of similar astrology, which I don't think that I mentioned to you, but we've talked a lot about Scorpio, and I
Yeah.
love to talk about Pluto and Scorpio on this podcast, but there is this depth that is really fascinating and interesting to those of us that are sort of Plutonian in nature. And so it didn't surprise me to look at your chart. And I've also been reading your book, which is fucking awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's really, really, it's a page turner. It's just so cool to be able to dive into the perspective of all of these people. And I know that that's one of your gifts, is being able to write through different perspectives. And I think that that is something that's very Scorpion, right? Is this, it's almost like you can, I think you have a Pisces moon too. So this is also very Pisces moon, but to be able to go into other people's experience and write it in a way that is believable. And so you're very adept at doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted for Shine of the Ever, which is the new collection, I really wanted to offer as many voices as possible. Um, I have been called Protean, Proteus from Greek mythology, um, the shapeshifter, and I tried to bring that to the table as much as possible in this collection. Um, I was writing, for two pretty distinct audiences. I wanted to write, obviously, for the community that I'm part of, the queer community. But I also understood that a lot of the folks who were going to be reading it are not queer and don't identify that way. They may be allies, they may be sort of bystanders, but I really wanted to write something that would enable a non-queer reader to understand a little bit of what it is like to be trans. Um, in the past, that's been one of the most commonly asked questions that I get. When I wrote my first big piece about my identity, it was published in the New York Times in the Modern Love column. And the editor really kindly passed along some wonderful reader responses that were essentially all saying the same thing. I didn't know it was like that. I didn't know that my nephew, my grandchild, my partner felt that way. Thank you for saying something that I was experiencing but couldn't put into words. And so I wanted to take those questions and sort of answer them with this new book. My hope is that people will not only see themselves, but they will experience the transgender community and the queer community in a new and compassionate way.
Wow. I think that you have really done that. You know, my experience in reading your book is that you do make it so that we can feel and sort of get into the experience of what that is like. And, you know, not being trans and, you know, being more of an ally type, I still see myself really clearly in a lot of the characters that you're writing about. There's a lot of longing. There's some unrequited love. There's the discomfort, really, that shows up around being in a body and being human and, you know, having to navigate this world. And you just kind of captured it in such graceful ways through the storylines of so many different kinds of people. And that was something else that I wanted to ask you about, is that, you know, being able to jump into these different perspectives with so much nuance, and everybody is different, right? It's not like you're just writing for one demographic. Like, how do you do that? What is that like for you?
For me, it is uncomfortable. How do I do that? Yeah, the book, again, I emphasized, or tried to emphasize, the diversity in my community. I think it's pretty common, especially in the media, to see people like me represented, you know, tall, white, thin, androgynous or masculine presenting. You know, there's like a fashion queer look, you know, with an undercut and a septum ring and an arrow tattoo. And, you know, it's a style as much as it is an identity. So I really wanted to work outside of that, because that's not what everybody looks like. You know, my characters are all across the gender identity spectrum, all across the sexual identity spectrum. They come from different backgrounds, different races, different hometowns. One of the things I hear a lot about my hometown, which is Portland, oh, Portland's so white. Oh, it's so accepting there. Oh, it's so progressive. And none of those things is totally true. So, you know, I was sort of writing against that expectation that this is going to be a book about, you know, sad white queers in the Pacific Northwest. That's not what this is about. And to accomplish that, what I did was I listened. I did a lot of listening. I've been really lucky to have a community of my own, you know, a community of friends, both online and in person, who are open about sharing their experiences, their thoughts, and their feelings, who are interested in transmitting what it's like to live inside their skin. Um, I think the temptation is always to say, oh, that's a human experience, or that's a universal experience. And maybe it is, but there is also something very distinct about each of my characters. And I wanted them to have that distinctness because it gives them dignity. What I really avoided, and what I discuss in one of my, one of the stories, Litter Mates, is the idea that because you are different, you will be a symbol to somebody who's reading from the mainstream. You know, to a person who doesn't have your experience, they'll say, oh, I connect with that. Or, oh, you know, you symbolize tragedy to me because you're an outsider. Or you symbolize rebellion to me because you are forced to live outside of, you know, what's considered conventional and safe. But, you know, for those of us who do have that experience, you know, my mainstream is very different from somebody else's. So I try to honor that with my characters and give them space to speak, give them, you know, the freedom to live their own story. And in this collection, very importantly, there are no sad endings. There is no murder. There is no rape. There is no pain. that is beyond, I think, an ordinary everyday amount of struggle. You know, I really did not want to create these characters and then kill them, because that's a trope that we see repeated again and again as well. So I don't know. I mean, to answer your question, I listen to other people when they speak about who they think they are, and when I am writing, I try to be kind. I had a teacher many years ago who was just so merciful with his characters, and they were badly behaved characters. You know, they were cheating on each other and drinking too much and falling in the pool and, you know, just dumb shit. And he was so compassionate with them. I asked him, how did you do this? And he said, when I'm writing about my characters, I take the perspective of a kind God. I don't like what I see, but I see it anyway. And I try to understand why the person would behave that way, even if I never come up with excuses for them or try to make space to, you know, let them redeem themselves, even, because redemption is also a really common trope in queer stories. Um, I I try to be kind. I try to be kind to my characters the way I would want somebody to be kind to me.
Yeah, wow, thank you. That I just could have kept listening to you talk forever. And you know, as you're talking, I'm looking at your chart and I noticed that your north node is in Gemini, and the north node is what our soul is coming in to learn to do, and Gemini is about listening. It's about tuning in and entering into conversation with people. And I think conversation in our culture has turned a lot into one person yelling and trying to convince the other person that they're right. But there's something that's very soft about what you're saying is I'm listening. You know, I'm open to all of the different versions of perspective that show up, and I'm aware that nobody is going to have the same experience. And I love how you're sort of acting, because it sounds like you're kind of acting like the kind God too. And I think that's, you know, that is part of listening, right? Is saying, I hear you. I'm holding space for you. Mm-hmm. So you're on the right track according to your natal chart anyway.
I'm glad to hear that. What else does it say?
So I wanted to talk a lot with you about Pallas Athena.
Yes.
And Pallas Athena is an asteroid, and so we don't talk as much about the asteroids in astrology. I mean, some astrologers do, but in sort of the astrology that we see everywhere, it's more planet focused. But Pallas Athena is an asteroid that is often connected with gender fluidity. And you have Pallas Athena conjunct your sun. It's right up there, only 1 degree away from your sun. So I wanted to read something. There's a great book about the asteroids called The Asteroid Goddesses by Demetra George. And so I just wanted to read something that I found in this book that kind of stuck out to me. So it's about Pallas Athena and androgyny. So there's a passage that reads, another result of androgyny is the deconditioning of sex role typing. As Pallas ever strives towards balance and wholeness, she permits us to express and blend our male and female sides within one unified and integrated self. And, you know, I don't know what that passage means to you, whether it relates to you, and you'll have to tell me, but it does seem like with Pallas Athena so closely conjunct your sun, which is your sense of self, it's your sense of being in the world, your essential true nature without any of the conditioning. And we as humans, we have to be in the world for a long time, in my opinion. We have to do a lot of stuff before we're able to really check in and get to even small, you know, a small vision of our essential self. But it seems like this is one of the things that your soul came here to experience, are these questions of gender and patriarchy. And so I'm just I kind of want to get your reflection on all of that or any of that.
I love Athena. I went through a Greek mythology phase as a young person. Surprise, surprise. I mean, Athena is the best. She has a helmet. She has her own chariot. She was born fully formed, which is so cool. And I was reflecting on this earlier about how, she is the goddess of wisdom and the arts, the patron of all of these vital cultural systems. And at the same time, she's so fucking petty, you know? At the beginning of, is it the Odyssey? Paris refuses to give her the golden apple that says for the fairest. And as a result, she takes sides with the Greeks against the Trojans and fuels the Trojan War. This peasant girl named Arachne is a better weaver than Athena. And so Athena turns her into a spider because she won't have any competition. So to me, Athena is like big Scorpio energy.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that petty long game is really, really unique. But in terms of gender fluidity, I do connect with what you're saying. What's interesting for me about identifying as a non-binary trans person is that people often ask, well, are you going to become a man? I was assigned female at birth. Are you going to become a man? And the answer is no. And I don't feel like a woman. I identify as a feminist, but that's not the same thing. And so it's been interesting, since I sort of found the words to identify myself and start coming out, to assert my space and say I'm not transitioning to anything, I'm transitioning to myself. There is a lot of responsibility that comes with that. I think every trans person carries to some degree a heavy load for the responsibility of defining themselves, whether they are binary trans, assigned male at birth, and sort of refining their presentation to be more female or vice versa. I think it's a lot to take on, especially in a system that would prefer you look a particular way, behave a particular way, go to the bathroom in a particular way, all of that stuff. As someone who is non-binary, there are very few spaces that are accessible to me as I am. I was in Washington, D.C. a couple of months ago. I'd taken part in a national campaign sponsored by Facebook and the Partnership for Keeping Kids Off of Drugs. And we did a video campaign called Stop Opioid Silence, where I got to be part of a video campaign that went viral via Facebook's platform, talking about my experience as a non-binary trans person in recovery from addiction. And the back end of this is the campaign was launched. We were all flown to Washington, D.C. I was one of several people who took part in this. And I was allowed to meet with representatives from my home state of Oregon in the Capitol building in DC. To do this, I wore a suit and a tie and my shiny shoes. And I'll tell you that there is no all-gender bathroom in the Capitol building. And so I had to choose, am I going to go into the men's bathroom, which is full of guys and, urinals and probably two stalls, which may not have a door, or am I going into the women's bathroom? And I had to decide, and I went with the women's. I used the bathroom, I was washing my hands, and a woman opened the door and saw me at the sink and she almost screamed. She was so surprised. She drew back and I saw her look at the plaque on the door, women, and look at me again, and look at the plaque, and look at me again. And she refused to come in until I was gone. And that experience is pretty common for me now. It's very strange to feel that just by the virtue of me being myself and asserting who I am in binary spaces is extremely disruptive, which to me is aligned sort of with the Aquarius sun, the disruptor, sort of the David Bowie molecule that says, I'm going to make change, and I'm going to change the world in a universal way. So yeah, the connection between the two is pretty, for me, like I feel that I live it. And since I've come out, that process has really cracked me open, in a painful way sometimes. But just, I mean, who knew that just saying this is who I am was going to be so transformative for me and for so many other people? I did not anticipate that. Not at all. But here we are.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's a lot of work just to be, especially when you're in situations where you're having people have such a reaction.
It's pretty surprising. I don't know. I love who I am. I don't get hung up on it too much, I think. It's, I think that if I was sort of walking around being, traumatized by my own self all the time, I get pretty worn out. But I mean, the fact is that I'm usually pretty comfortable, with myself. It's only when I'm in these situations where I'm coming up against another person's perception of me or their expectations for me, then we start to have some conflict. Um, with that said, I also feel like being grounded in a stronger sense of self, I am more prepared to deal with that than I might have been before. Having this sort of awakening, at this point in my life, I'm 35. I think having lived some decades already and been through quite a bit, I think prepared me for the stress and the surprise of doing this and doing it in a way that really honors myself.
Yeah. So my guess is that being sober has really supported that. And I'm curious, when you say awakening, do you feel like you're in the process of spiritually awakening? And if you are, when do you think it started?
Oh wow, that's a great question. Let's see. I got sober when I was 23. So I recently celebrated 12 years of recovery. And I came out, I think, 2.5 or 3 years ago. It's been a minute. It's interesting, around the time when I was figuring out who I was and starting to understand, oh, I'm not just queer. Because, I've been out as queer since I was 15. Like, that's not new information. I've had relationships with people of all stripes and loved them all. But I was in this relationship with this man. He was a Scorpio. And, it was a really weird relationship for a lot of reasons, but through our connection and through the fact that he was straight, white, educated, very square, a very, very square guy, that really showed me how being partnered with him was completely inappropriate for who I am. I felt that I was in this relationship in part because I wanted to be normal so badly. I found the most normal person I could and just like committed to it. And that was such a bad idea. It made me physically sick. I lost a lot of weight. I had a hard time getting out of bed. Um, I had to go on antidepressants for a period of time. And, in that phase, I had a hard come to Jesus with myself about, you can't keep this up. You can't live in the closet like this. You can't have a partner who erases your identity, who says, oh, baby, it's okay if it's just role playing, but, are you sure you want to do that in public? This person sort of had a fantasy about, running for office and having a life in public service in the spotlight. And I thought, you are not going to want me standing next to you at the podium, brother. I am not, I'm not a Hillary Clinton type. So, thank God I'm in recovery, because I was able to, see myself very clearly. It's the mixed blessing of sobriety, is that, you learn a lot about yourself, and there is no avoiding it. Once I've seen something, I cannot unsee it. And once I've acknowledged it, I have to act on it. I've never been a person to like sit on something for a very long time. So, this discomfort, was eased somewhat by the community I'm part of in recovery. What's been interesting, I attend meetings in Portland, and when I travel, I meet other people who are like me. And that is the one space in my life where nobody has batted an eye about anything I'm going through, from my name change, changing from using my first given name to my last given name, changing my hair, starting hormone therapy, my voice lowering, my decision to bind my chest, my my external changes, and the way that I talk about myself as well. I have experienced nothing but total acceptance in the recovery community. Nobody has challenged me or looked down on me. Outside of that community, I'm treated like a novelty sometimes, kind of freaky. I've met people who refused to touch me because I identify as trans. They would not touch my physical body. But in the rooms, I'm embraced, and that means a great deal to me.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's something about being in recovery that is, we're all sort of humbled in the same way. We're all coming from our own version of shit. And
Yeah,
so there's something that we kind of remove um, I don't know, like removing the removement of the judgment in a way. I don't know if I'm saying this in the right way, but
no, I agree with you. I think, outside that community, there's something. I mean, addiction is no respecter of persons, right? It's that illness and that level of misery is the great equalizer. I've met people who make six figures and higher, who are blowing rails of cocaine and oxy off the marble counters in their freshly redone kitchens.
they're
And
fucking
like,
miserable, right?
they're no different than I am.
Yeah.
They're no different from me. And that is, it's sad that it comes from that misery, but the fact is that we are equals in recovery. I mix with people who I would never have contact with otherwise, and I'm okay with that, because they're mixing with me too. Um, it's been instructive to know that I'm meeting people who have known me in one particular way for a long time, and I still feel included. I feel welcome. There's some curiosity, like, how did you know, or what's happening to you? but I don't feel the judgment around it. And I think that sobriety, especially when you've made it, essentially made it through hell together, I think that destroys a lot of the social hierarchy that we see outside of recovery. I think, not I think, but I know that, from an intersectional perspective, the trans person is pretty low on the totem pole. They're not centered. They're not included in many of these spaces that I have access to. So it's very, very encouraging to know that even if somebody has known me in one particular way, they are willing to step outside of their preconceptions and love me anyway.
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting when I look at your chart, because you have this Pallas Athena conjunction to your sun, and they're both in the sign of Aquarius. And, in one way, Aquarius doesn't care what other people think, because they're so attracted to operating outside of the norm, because this is what Uranus does. Uranus rules Aquarius, it's a revolutionizing planet. And so the things that are stagnant and old, Uranus and Aquarius come in with a mission to really change and shake up. And so on one hand, you say that you're not as affected by the way that people see you as you might have been at one point. And yet at the other side of that Aquarius is the wanting to belong, the really wanting to be a part of the group. One of the key words for Aquarius that I use often with clients is like, are you in or are you out? And this is a big question for Aquarius type people. So you have obviously Pallas Athena there sort of as your warrior. So there is this strength, this inherent strength that you have to be able to just be you, even though you're doing all of this interpersonal work around what that means. And and we're all doing that. You're certainly operating from probably a somewhat different perspective than a lot of people are. And yet it's like you're here. That's what you're here to do. And then you have this Pisces moon that is so sensitive, that feels everybody's stuff. So it's like, how do you work with that? So the part of you that's like really strong and sure, and then the part of you that can feel just feel what the world is feeling.
Oh, you have to be brave.
Yeah.
You have to be brave. I was not always as happy as I am now. Growing up, I was bullied at school and at home every day. I was told I was a weirdo, I was a freak, I was a fag, all of it. I was one of those people who didn't eat in the lunchroom. I hid under a table in the library during lunch. When I was old enough, I would sneak out behind the school and smoke cigarettes behind the drama building. So, I always was sort of a loner. My best friend in high school, also a Scorpio, November 2nd. We would stand around and talk about Kerouac and talk about these, fabulous, very individualistic writers. And our refrain was, if they can't take a joke, fuck them. If somebody doesn't appreciate you or understand you, fuck them. They're not going to get it. If they don't get it, they don't get it. Those were really, really hard years. Certainly, I feel I have a thick skin and as many defense mechanisms as anybody could want. But, it's throughout all of that, I had and still have a faith that the people who need to hear what I have to say will have no trouble understanding me. And of course, when you're an outsider and when you're, terminally unique, like I am, it's pretty easy to look around and say, well, it's not bad to be doing something that's different from everybody else. Because at some point, if you hold on and hang in there and keep doing what feels authentic to you, the tide will turn. And everybody who was so happy doing the same thing as each other, in their same jeans and their same sweaters and their same cars and their same jobs and their same kid names and their same whatevers, at some point, those people will realize how badly they crave something different. And they will start to listen and they will start to wonder, what is this person doing? Why are they so happy? What have they been saying all along? The surge goes in two different directions. And while I've resisted, not without consequences, becoming too much like other people, I also know that for somebody who's living a square, normal, mainstream life, what I have to say is compelling, because it's, I've always felt that my job, whether I like it or not, is to mirror to the rest of the world who they really are. And it's often by showing them the differences, or the lack of difference. Are you like me? Are you not like me? What are your choices saying about you? I think you can learn a lot about a person by the way they treat somebody who is very, very different from themselves. And so for me, again, when I'm entering these spaces that are very white, that are very square, that are very heterosexual, that are very conventional, the way that people react to me in those spaces tells me everything I need to know about them. And I think it's important to reveal that information for the person as well, to say, you don't like me because I'm different, or you fear what you don't understand. I think our culture, for centuries has held up these examples of difference. I'm thinking of like Grace Jones, for example. I mentioned Bowie. These icons who are beloved and deified almost because they are so outside what ordinary people do in their living rooms at night. And that is who I keep my eye on. I'm not interested in being like other people. In the first story in my collection, it talks about, it's written in the first person plural, so we, a community's voice. And it's about being at a show. And I actually wrote it while I was at a punk show. I was in the mosh pit. And I got to tell you, that's not a huge deal because Portland has the most polite mosh pits I've ever been in, like the most polite. And, I'm at this show. It was amazing. It was actually Long Knife, and they were playing at the Crystal Ballroom in Lola's room. And I had this moment of inspiration hit me, and I pulled my phone out and typed that whole story with my thumbs on my iPhone while I was being like shoved around by these very, very polite punks. But like that story specifically talks about like why, like the pain and trouble of conforming to what other people want you to do. Get a job, go to work, put your kid through college, wear regular shoes, wear regular earrings instead of putting safety pins in your ears, listen to dad rock instead of, melt banana, like whatever it is. There's this process that I think all human beings go through where they're like those beautiful spiky, like weird edges get knocked off one at a time. And we're told that that's good to become more normal. And like, I don't want that. I didn't get sober so that I could have a normal life. I didn't come out because I wanted to fit in with everybody else. I've taken those steps because I want to know who I am. That's my life's task. That's my journey.
Oh, I could, once again, just listen to you keep talking. And I just want to say, as a side note, that you speak in a very similar style to the way that you write. And it's very compelling. It's like so much wisdom packed into every sentence. So I really appreciate that we're getting to have this conversation. And I think that so many people are going to love your book just because of you and how you are. So that's just a side note. But something that's coming up for me is that Pallas Athena is really connected to snake symbolism and snake energy. And
Hmm.
I didn't mention this in my notes to you, but so I don't want to like catch you too off guard, but there is something about the snake energy that I sort of feel it when I'm talking to you. Is there's this awareness, there's this intuition, this intellect, this transformation, this sort of hidden occult knowledge that you seem to have. So just kind of off the top of your head, do you relate? How do you feel about snakes? Do you relate to that kind of energy? Do you feel like you embody some of them?
It's funny when you said snake. I'm not afraid of snakes. Um, I take that back. I'm not afraid of any snake where I know what it is.
Are you about to kill me? Because if you are, then I'm scared of you.
Exactly. Are you a coral snake? What stripes are you again? Do you have a rattle? Uh, yeah, I have handled a lot of snakes. That's not a euphemism. I I mean, from a young age, we'd go out and catch garter snakes, and they they pee all over you. That horrible musky piss that just coats everything. But I just remember learning from a young age that you can pick a snake up by the neck and it won't be able to do anything about it. I don't fear them. Um, I have a few tattoos of mermaids, and all the mermaids have snake tails. When somebody sees part of them, they say, "Oh, is that an Ouroboros? Is it a snake?" No, it's a mermaid. Um, so I don't know. When I think of serpents in particular, there's two of them on the caduceus, right? The symbol of healing.
Uh-huh.
Snakes are highly adaptive because they're reliant on the temperature of their environment to be active or not. On a hot day, a snake is busy. On a cold day, he's asleep under a rock. Um, I don't know. And they eat. They are horrifying when they eat, and so am I.
Yeah, I found this quote when I was sort of researching the snake symbolism, and it says, whether raising itself in masculine authority or encircling the earth in a motherly fashion, the snake, symbol of the Native Americans, was highly regarded, utilized in ritual to invoke an element of pointed focus and weighty influence.
Hmm.
And that just seems like it applies to you, at least from what I know of you and what you have shared with me today.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and so one final thing, your book has a lot of magic in it. It's a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
questions about faith. There's a lot of astrology in it. And of course, you do have a Pisces moon that is very magical in its own right. Um, you have your Neptune, which is the planet of really developing a deep connection to spirit and to faith, whatever that looks like for us. And it's in a conjunction with Jupiter, which is about expanded viewpoints. So you really have many places in your chart that points directly to doing work around your experience of magic and the metaphysical. So I don't know, just tell me a little bit about that if you don't mind.
Oh. I feel very seen right now. A lot of the characters in Shine of the Ever contend with Christianity, and it's a very specific type of Christianity. I'm not talking about, the radical Christ that is embodied, in flipping tables in the temple, or, spending time meditating with temple prostitutes. The god of the outcasts is more the Christ of trans people, I think. But the characters come up against again and again this fundamentalist religion that is exclusionary and reductive, and in the end, sort of toxic to the people who fit in and the people who don't. Queer community, especially as I experience it, and especially at this particular moment in history, is very much about decolonizing faith and finding spaces outside of that strict and prescriptive religion, to still connect with the divine. I read this wonderful anthology called Becoming Dangerous that I highly, highly recommend. It is an essay collection by different writers from, very different parts of, the gender and sexual and race and everything spectrums. And it's about their experiences essentially finding magical tools to empower themselves. I read this book shortly after I had finished Shine and was just like, yes, this is it. So for me, it's been a similar process. From a young age, I believed in magic. I still do. I don't understand how you can live and not believe in something wonderful about this planet that we're on. It's pretty special. Tarot cards, especially astrology, they've colored my life. And in the book, those tools are sort of used to define spiritual space beyond the Judeo-Christian, or in one story, the tradition of Islam, to move beyond that. I've described my gender as not being fixed. And for me, it's not about a metamorphosis as much as it is walking into the woods of my gender and trying to see what I can find. It is exploration for me. So, in terms of magic, astrology gives you a chart to navigate by. The cards will answer your question, probably not in the way you want them to. I think,
Right?
right? I mean, I think queer people, in Portland, and I think elsewhere too, in Portland, if you ask someone what their sign is and they know their moon and their ascending, they are probably queer. It's a marker for belonging in this community. Do you know your Mercury? Do you know your Venus? Well, I'm dating Taurus Venus, so we go to eat a lot, that kind of thing. It's this it's from the perspective of a story, it's a bit of a conceit, because it provides this perfect ready-made lens for how characters understand themselves and understand each other. I think that faith has been so degraded, in the last, I don't know, my lifetime, probably before that. I think, I've seen spirituality, even the agnostic or wild spirituality, I've seen it commodified. Faith is a brand now in America. um, the idea of being redeemed or saved, and that's your brand. Or churches that put trademark symbols after their names, or whatever it is. And that feels very wrong to me. I think that for me, and certainly for my characters, magic is important because it gives us a sense of freedom to find out what is on the other side of the experience that we have. It's a tool set. It's the finger that points at the moon, and it's a paradigm for me that allows me to be more open-minded and understanding of other people. When I was younger, I lived with this woman who was a Leo sun and a Virgo moon. And she had 8-year-old twins with the exact same chart that she did. So there was 3 of them. Okay. Almost identical. And before I was allowed to move in, she did my chart. And I passed, obviously I made it in. She decided that my Virgo rising was good and that all the water in my chart would be very cooling for this nest of Leo Virgos. It was hair raising though. And I was in my early 20s, and I just remember, I had this moment where I was sitting with her and she's talking about, the planets and the movements and all that stuff. It was the first person I'd met who was deeply, deeply like serious about astrology and wasn't dismissive of it and didn't treat it like a game, which I appreciated. And, she said something like, oh, well, he can't help himself. He's got an Aries sun. She said some joke about somebody. And it just clicked for me that like, oh yeah, like people are different from each other because they're different from each other. And since then, like, I've just loved astrology, it doesn't matter to me. Like, I don't know. It's a great tool for understanding the diversity that is natural for us.
Yeah, I agree. And I think too that something that's always appealed to me about, things like, well, metaphysical things as opposed to organized religion is that there is this built-in fluidity that is allowed. We don't have to worry about going to hell, and we don't even have to worry about being stuck in a version of hell because we have free
Mm-hmm.
will.
Yep.
We also have, somewhat of a faded chart, but it's like we're not locked into it. There are so many different ways that we can approach the interpretation of everything in astrology and everything in tarot that it's like we can, if we're open to hearing the message that we need in that moment, then it's really lovely. And we also aren't locked into some dire doom and gloom. Oh my God, we're going to be feeling like shit for the rest of our lives because, of this placement or because we pulled this card. And that really appeals to me, is the ability to sort of navigate in whatever way is useful and necessary for that time, for that moment.
Mm-hmm. I had heard that once a person starts reading their cards or checking their horoscope, what they're really looking for is permission to change their lives. They've sensed that they want to change or that they need to change, and they are looking for permission to go ahead and do that. And I believe that.
Yeah, I like that. And I also like the aspect of validation. I know I've talked about this before on this podcast, but for me, learning astrology was so incredibly validating because my
Mm-hmm.
inner critic that sort of has the running narrative of you're fucking everything up.
Mm.
It was like getting into the astrology made me see like, wow, no, this is part of the journey. These things have happened and these imperfections have shown up along the way, and I'm more powerful and I'm more knowledgeable now because I've gone through them. I'm not just somebody that's bumbling through life in quite the way that I had thought that I was before.
Oh, there's a pattern. It's okay.
Right. Right. Like, oh my God, I have Saturn in my 7th house, which is, Saturn is about limitations, and the 7th house is about relationships and particularly intimate partnerships. And, I've had some amazing relationships in my life, but for the most part, they tend to have a crash and burn quality at the end. And it's like,
Ah.
oh, yay. I understand it now. And I've also done, a lot of work to kind of mitigate some of my own behaviors that kind of lead to the crash and burn. So, but yeah, anyway, God, this has been so fun. And I'm wondering, can you tell us how people can find you, and also when your book is coming out? I know it's available for pre-order, but give us some info.
Sure. The book is called Shine of the Ever, and it is released by Interlude Press on November 5th. You can find it on their website, Interlude Press. You can also find it on Amazon, or you can do your local independent bookstore a solid and pre-order it from them. You can also request it from your local library, which is free. I can be found on Twitter at Foster_Rudy_. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm all over the internet pretty much all the time. And I love talking to people about their experiences with magic, and especially love talking about music. So anytime you can reach out to me through my website at clairerudyfoster.com. I have a contact form. And I would love to hear from people who are as excited about this book as I am.
Yay. And I just want to also tell people that you have written some really spectacular articles that are on different websites, like The Temper, and I think you said the New York Times. But I've found a bunch of them, and I'm like blown away anew every time I read a new thing. So seek those out too. And also, I wanted to say something that you pointed out before we were recording, is that your book is going to be a Scorpio.
A Scorpio. I did its chart. I looked it up. November 5th is a world shaker.
But I think it's very fitting to have a Scorpio child. So
he's my beautiful rectangular sun.
I love it. Oh, well, thank you so much, Foster. This was awesome. And I'm so appreciative that we got to have this conversation.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for being here with me and listening. If you are interested in helping me, leave a review. You can leave us a star review, you can leave us a word review, but the reviews really help get the episodes and the podcast in general seen by more people. And if you want to ask me questions, give me feedback, if you have show ideas, or if you're interested in coming on the show, you can find me on my website, noctacampanella.com, or find me on Instagram at nocta_campanella_astrology. Oh, and recommend this podcast to friends that you think might like it too. All right.